As biologists and biomedical scientists, many of us, confronted by this three-dimensional issue and find ourselves situated near that intersection, which is lying at the, so to speak, point of origin of three different themes, all of which are powerful in our lives. There's the basic knowledge axis, there's the biomedical relations, and there's some controversy as to the temporal rapport between these two, but there's no question but the temporal rapport between this one and the others is hands down. There is no ambiguity as to who's the winner in this context. It's a very rich triple identity, and it's a challenge and it's a moving target for all of us. There are those people who insist you can't understand anything without the evolutionary context. They are right. And there are the people who say you just should not study disease before you study the basic science. They are right. And there are the people who take the third axis, and that battle will never stop. But we are all the beneficiaries, obviously, from this ongoing struggle. So I'm going to try to be brief, and when it comes to introducing our three most distinguished guests, in fact, I'm not going to waste your time by flattering them. I'm just going to have a few words, but indeed this event is framed by three very special visitors. Now, before we get there, many people have worked in these fields with which we are concerned, and you can choose to identify with one or another of the figures that happens to be in this slide. I'd like to call your attention to two extremes, and one is this gentleman here. So all of these individuals were concerned with inheritance. All these individuals were concerned with consistency, with some of the deep mysteries. So this is Schrödinger. Schrödinger wrote a powerful, serious exposition of genetics and thought seriously about this strange situation that inheritance, or the genetic material then unidentified, had such constant characteristics. And considering his point of view with regard to physics, this was indeed a major contradiction. And it's quite unusual, if you read his small book, What is Life, to see the depth to which he went and the admiration that he did have for genetics, which was much in excess, I'm sure, of a large fraction of biologists of his time. He was living in Ireland at that point. And our other founding father, perhaps, over here, is that gentleman who really did not understand genetics at all. And maybe he was not even concerned with genetics. That was Charles Darwin, of course, who in contemporary parlance had no idea what he was dealing with. And it is probably reasonable to say that if inheritance indeed was all a flux of a little more and a little less, absolutely nothing ever would have happened. However, he discerned, like his parents and the others in his community, many fundamental features of inheritance and the nature of evolutionary change that obviously have formed our thinking. So this is a Hanna Symposium. Normally what we have is a single Hanna guest, a highly distinguished, usually international guest who's here for a single day. We've enlarged on that. And this event is supposed to call to the attention of a broad range of members of this community some subject matter which is of dominant importance. Now, I would like to really be able to introduce H.M. Hanna, but I could not find a picture of him. But nearby, there's a statue, you can go and visit it if you like, of a relative, Mark Hanna, down at the intersection, who looks serious enough to really, I think, play this role. The story is a pleasant one because this is called the Hanna Lectureship since 1913. And it came into existence in 1913 not because Hanna gave money, came into existence because a friend of his, George Kreil, gave money. So George Kreil later went on to found the Cleveland Clinic some decade later. But this Hanna, a major industrialist himself in the region, was a good friend, and he wanted to commemorate his friend. So if any of you have a little extra money and you would like a good idea, I think it has proven its worth through time, because indeed we've had a very interesting so-called distinguished group of visitors. The visitors in the order of their presentations today, obviously, are Drs. Haber and Dujon and Heater, and They're joined by a variety of so-called Cleveland scientists. The event is supported by these different sources of funding and enthusiasm. And we wouldn't be here at all if it weren't for Denise Miller, who perhaps is outside, who's the coordinator of Everything Practical, Melissa Ricco, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and two students whose job is going to be to keep us approximately on time. And this is especially for questions and answers, because as each person gives a talk, be it, say, let's say 45 minutes or 20 minutes, the intent is that there be 5 minutes for questions and answers, and subsequently, as you see in the program, there are a variety of breaks, so more questions could extend into the breaks. But if we don't keep moving, we're not going to get there. So part of the mindset here is to pack the intellectual content. We are not in a sort of lackadaisical way drifting along through a typical day and taking a sip of Starbucks coffee and then going off and listening to our favorite news report and checking on the baseball team. The intent is to pack the intellectual content, and having said that, I think we better get started.